Canon M200 versus Sony A5100. Which is the $400 streaming webcam champion? Stay tuned and find out. The bodies of both cameras are surprisingly similar in size, shape, weight, the same flip-up screen, the same lack of cold shoe mount or microphone input. So you're mostly stuck with HDMI output and USB output for the respective USB webcam applications. But if you want to run audio into these cameras, that is not an option. Both cameras feature roughly a 15 to 55 or 45 millimeter zoom lens, which gives you a fair bit of zoom range. However, keep in mind there is an APS-C crop factor involved. One is 1.5x, the other is 1.6x. But that means that it's going to be fairly tight compared to what you're used to seeing for a webcam, but it's still serviceable. However, you don't really want to zoom in any more than that for a normal webcam, but you do have that option if you want to go further back in your room or you're using it as a vlog camera or whatever. The M200 also ships with Canon's Creator Kit, which is very similar to the Sony ZV-1 in that it comes with a tripod, a little Bluetooth remote tripod thingy, but that adds like an extra $100 and really isn't worth it in my opinion. Image quality out of both of these cameras is pretty solid for a 1080p 60 webcam. You get super smooth frame rates compared to a webcam, no dropped frames, anything like that. You can run into whatever capture card you like. Both of them have auto exposure settings if you want to leave it in full auto mode like a webcam, but to get, desirable results to make it worth an upgrade over a traditional USB webcam, you're going to want to fine tune your lighting and your ISO and shutter speed exposure settings to get the best results. The aperture ranges on the lenses for both of these webcams, if you're using the kit lenses that come with them, are both around f3.5 as the widest they go, which means you're not going to get the whole blurry background look. As you can see in the samples here, the background is decently blurry, but you're not going to get the super shallow depth of field look because f3.5 on a crop factor lens is not, it's just not going to do it. But you can buy third-party lenses for it. The Canon M200 looked to be a major shift in philosophy for Canon, who historically did not really support clean HDMI output out of their cameras when it comes to live streaming and content creation, debuting this as a streamer's camera, as I mentioned at CES 2 years ago now, but it's a weird camera. It does provide clean HDMI feed with unlimited output time, even though the display on the back itself actually only outputs for 30 minutes, which is weird. And you can get a dummy battery for it to power it straight off of USB. So you can just plug it in the USB port in your monitor or something. You can't power it off a USB out of the camera, but a dummy battery is a totally fine workaround. On paper, this seems like a good thing, especially with the flip-up screen, which the Sonys don't have. Autofocus, the autofocus. It's not the fastest, especially coming from, Sony bodies. It's not the fastest thing in the world, but it works. And the camera is sharp and clear enough once you have it tuned correctly. But I really struggle to see if it's a worthwhile buy. So for context, I have reviewed quite a few cameras for streaming. My one I championed last 2 years ago now, I guess, 3 years ago maybe. The Sony A5100 is like the best bang for the buck camera you can get for your live stream. And then there's cameras like the A6400, which I absolutely love. I don't know where I said it. The A7S II, if you can find it cheap used, is also a phenomenal camera with good autofocus. The original A7S can do clean HDMI output, but the real-time autofocus for that is not great. And the A7S II still doesn't perform as well as the A6400 or my new bad boy, the A7C. And regardless, we need competitors from the likes of Canon and Panasonic to keep everyone on their toes. Panasonic still has abysmal autofocus when it comes to live view outputs, even though their mirrorless cameras are some of the best because they don't overheat. And you got clean 4K output way before anyone else, pretty much. Panasonic G7 and G85 are still some insane value, and I still have 2 of them around my studio for these purposes. But the M200 was a really interesting option. But when I got home from CES, and upon realizing that despite having thought I schmoozed them and, had my reputation going and things like that with them, they weren't going to send me one. And then I looked at the price. And from what I can tell, the launch price of this thing was nearly $700 for a tiny little mirrorless camera that you're only going to realistically use at 1080p 60. Keep in mind, at the time, the market was where you could easily find all sorts of listings on OfferUp and eBay and Craigslist for Sony A5100s for $250 or less. I got quite a few that I've passed through the studio back then for like 175, 200 bucks. It wasn't hard. They were everywhere. Now, the pandemic hit, the work from home era hit, and those A5100s have been driven back up towards $400. But at the time, I was like, there's no way in hell I would ever recommend someone pay that much more for a camera to get the exact same output as the A5100. Now, it's not quite the same. Again, it's Canon versus Sony. You get some differences. I'm mostly going to have complaints here. I'm not going to lie. Even right now, if you want to buy this camera right now, we're going to have good things to talk about too. But my big harping here is it doesn't make sense to pay for it compared to everything else. But my big harping here right now is the price. Now, according to Canon's website, the MSRP is $549. However, Amazon and B&H and everywhere else has it listed for $649, which is still stupidly expensive. $549, still stupidly expensive. The used market, however, it sits around $400 and has for about 2 years now. I think I paid about $450 for mine when I originally bought it, thinking I was going to review it over a year ago now. I never got around to it because I was waiting for prices to go down. It didn't. So right now, it sits around $400 on eBay, which is about the price you would pay for an A5100. So if I were reviewing this in 2020 or 2019, I'd say no way in hell because of the price. If you're buying used versus the used A5100s anyway, in 2022, as a used purchase, it's not a bad deal. You're going to be paying this much anyway. And overall, it is competitive with the A5100. You get 1080p 60 output. I have my settings set right now at 1/125 shutter speed, 60 FPS output. f3.5 is the widest this lens goes, so it's a little dark. I actually had to crank my lenses up compared to what I'm used to. And we're sitting around ISO 640, which is not what I'd consider ideal. We still have... I don't like Canon colors. I'll say that now. I know lots of people do. I find them either too yellow or too red. It's always been the case for me. My skin tone does not come out looking great like it does in Sony colors. I have set it up with white balance matched for my lights. I have it set up where I have the brightness fine-tuned specifically for this camera, so I'm going to have to go and set all that back up for my other camera once I swap back. And I have it in the just kind of normal pixel profile with sharpness turned down to 2 because by default, all digital cameras crank up sharpness and you're going to want to turn that down for video content creation anyway. Contrast is at -1 and saturation is at -1 or 2 because my lips were looking like I had lipstick out of the box. The neutral profile just looks brown and flat and I'm not a fan of it at all. So like I said, personally, I'm not a fan of Canon colors. If you know that you are, maybe ignore that part. But overall, you know, compared to the A5100, you're getting a pretty decent image here in 1080p 60. Now, this is a 4K capable camera, but it only does 4K in 24 or 25 FPS, and there is a massive crop on it. In fact, I'm going to switch to that right now. This is the 4K mode. Now, it's super sharp, it's super clean, the image is actually really stellar at it, but you're now down to like a micro four thirds 16mm style crop, where you get an extra 0.5x at least crop factor on top of it, which is going to increase your background noise levels. And it's going to, you know, this is all the way zoomed out at a normal webcam mount. This is like C910 levels of crop going on here. And again, it's only 24 FPS. So Chop City for live streaming. Now, my other complaints have to do with usability. The menu system on this thing doesn't make any sense whatsoever in terms of like, I don't know. I'm used to Blackmagic and Sony where all the menus are easily accessible. You can adjust shutter speed, ISO, all of that. And with Canon, you have to go through different movie modes just to get to manual exposure and then to get the shutter speed priority. And then to like change it to 4K or 1080p, there's no, I'm going to change the record resolution. You just change the live view mode, which is kind of weird. Kind of neat at the same time, but kind of weird. All right, I believe in being totally fair, and I guess my claims about the Canon menus were not entirely fair, as the Sony menus on the A5100 specifically are also pretty bad in terms of finding all the settings compared to the newer cameras. But again, the A5100 is a very old camera. The Sony cameras that came out the same year the M200 camera are a lot better. Having a great webcam is a big step towards a polished live stream, but don't sleep on updating your visuals too. Today's sponsor, Nerd or Die, makes this easy. Nerd or Die features top-tier, high-quality stream overlays, widgets, alerts, and other assets, all fully customizable so that you can use just the parts you want and tweak them to your exact style. The new Flat Pack is perfect for that clean, minimalist look with lots of cool shapes and textures. Meanwhile, the Stream OS pack is inspired by setups like my own, and is great if you want some retro vibes in your chat, with 4 different themes within it, and the ability to make your own. All Nerd or Die layouts come with one-click setup scripts for OBS, Stream Elements, and Streamlabs, and have After Effects source files to render out your own versions of things. Save 15% at checkout with coupon code EposVox or the link below, but they're also having a spring streamer sale where you can get 40% off specific stream packs or 25% off site-wide, so if you're watching while that sale is active, you don't want to miss out on that. So I'm going to say overall, again, if you're buying this above a price point for any other camera with decent autofocus, I can't say it's a good buy. It's still a perfectly fine camera. This is going to be a super short video because I'm not going to do super in-depth on this because I actually just sold this to someone in my Discord server, so I need to get it packed up. I just wanted to finally post some samples of it. I'll have the A5100 shot side by side here with it. Like, it's fine. It's a great 1080p P60 camera, like I said. The autofocus is going to be miles better than any webcam. This is going to be a huge upgrade over any possible webcam you could buy at this moment, be it costing $40 or $300. It's hard for me to recommend cameras that don't do something innovative. Sony was one of the first to market with the clean live view output on a mirrorless camera with blazing fast autofocus, and it's a pretty good buy for that. And then the Sony A6400 sensor downsamples from 6K to 4K and has beautiful 4K image with live view output, and just, again, continues that face and eye tracking autofocus. The face and eye tracking autofocus in the M200 is pretty solid as well, but overall, it still just feels like lagging behind, which I guess is a funny theme for a video where I'm reviewing this 2 years late, but it just feels like too little, too late for this market, especially given the lens mount on this. So this is an interchangeable lens mount camera, like the A5100, whatever. You could go buy other lenses for it. I would consider that to be a poor investment. Obviously, if you plan on buying this camera and just using it, and you don't plan on upgrading or doing anything else anytime soon, whatever, that's fine. But it uses the EFM style mount, which is a more unique mirrorless mount that they made for it. The problem is, Canon has already made an entirely new line of mirrorless cameras with the RF mount. And the EFM isn't directly compatible with their EF lenses, and it's not compatible with the RF lenses, so you're buying into a dead lens ecosystem. It's just not a good investment all around, because if you buy lenses for this camera, you will not be able to use them with basically anything else, other than the M50 and the M100 and the M200. It's just, like I said, it's really hard to recommend that when you can buy. I hate sounding like a Sony fanboy. Again, my primary camera is a Blackmagic. I use multiple Panasonics throughout the studio. I still own a G7, a G85, and a GH5S because they are glorious. I've had 2 Sonys die for random reasons that aren't their fault, but they haven't been perfect. But when you buy a Sony camera, you get the same lens mount that are on all the Sony cameras, and the lenses are interchangeable across all of the cameras. The E mount is phenomenal. The EFM mount is not. This was a bit more of a rambly video, not my usual standard. Like I said, I just wanted to finally get samples up and talk about it. I think it's too little too late, just like this review. And I think if you're buying it brand new, you are throwing money away. I think if you're buying it used for $400, you're getting a competent camera that... I keep pointing up. I'm so sorry. I'm doing this subconsciously. Hold on. Let me grab this. You probably had no idea why I was continuing pointing up. I had my A5100 here mounted overhead as an overhead cam. And that's why I keep pointing up at it, because I'm referencing it in my space. You have no reason to know that. A5100 is basically the same style camera. Same flip-up screen, no mic mount, just like the M200, so you get no mic mount to actually put a microphone on it if you want to run audio through the camera. Not an option on either of these. Otherwise, they are nearly identical cameras, other than the M200 gets a 4K 24 mode. 1080p 60. The only real advantage the M200 has over the A5100 is that the M200 is far less likely, or it just in general won't, overheat. But that only happens if you're using a battery in the camera and you're writing to an SD card in the camera. If you have a dummy battery in and you're using an HDMI feed, A5100 will last weeks powered on and never overheat, and it's totally fine. So that's the only real advantage if you're using it for video outside of streams. The Sony cameras will overheat more often in normal recording with a battery and SD card scenarios, whereas the M200 won't. But for live streaming purposes, it's completely nullified. I will say A5100 with the kit lens has a default, unless you zoom in even just the tiniest bit, that turns it off. But it has a weird firmware bug. I think some third-party firmwares have fixed this, but not officially. Where unless you zoom in a tiny bit or enable digital clean zoom or whatever, there is a weird kind of beauty filter that's applied by default on the kit lens. Not a problem if you get another lens, or like I said, if you zoom in. That is one other thing, because the A5100 is actually much older than the M200. Hope you had a great weekend. We have some other awesome content coming up. Like I said, this one was more of a filler episode just for me to talk about this. If you're looking for other cameras or webcams to consider for your live stream, I have a whole playlist of webcams and cameras and things like that linked here. Or otherwise, if you want to perfect your stream audio for your stream and sound better than most people on Twitch or YouTube, check out this video here. Remember, be kind, rewind.